Welcome to United States Government. We are going to begin with Chapter 1 in the textbook. Hopefully you have already gone into Google Classroom and answered the discussion question over what is government. If you haven't done that yet, please do that before you watch this and take the notes. I want you to give me just what you think government is. Don't look it up, just give me what you think. Then you will also find in Google Classroom a page of notes where you will then be able to type out and fill in. I put the questions and things there, and you'll be able to fill it in with the information that we're going to talk about over the next few minutes. Feel free to pause anytime you need to. Anything you see that is in red for the most part is what you're going to put into your notes. All right, so we're going to start off with Chapter 1, Section 1. And the first thing we're going to ask is, what is government? That's the question you should have answered in the Google Classroom question that we've already talked about. So what is government? Well, according to the book, and this is what, make sure you write this down, this is in red, government is the formal structures and institutions through which decisions are made for a group of people. When it talks about structures, those would be like the branches of government, the things set up to facilitate making laws, executing laws, interpreting laws, the executive, legislative, judicial branches. The institutions would be the other parts of government they use, like the IRS that collects taxes, the FBI that does federal law enforcement, those kinds of things. And these are the structures and institutions through which decisions are made for a group of people. And that's the formal definition that your textbook gives, and it's the one you'll need to know for the test. However, there's another definition that I prefer, and it is this: the legitimate use of force to control human behavior and the institutions used to do so. Basically, it's the same thing. It just says it in a different way. It's when you have a body of people who have legitimate power, legitimate authority to use force to control human behavior, and the ways and the institutions or the methods, the mechanisms they do that through. So for instance, if you are going 85 in a 55 and the police see you, well, what are they going to do? They're going to pull you over and they're going to give you a ticket. So basically, the institution would be the police. They're pulling you over and giving you a ticket. They're going to force you to pay for that speeding violation, which is an attempt to control your behavior and keep people safe. Does that make sense? So government is basically the legitimate use of force to control behavior. And so just keep that in mind. But your one definition you're going to need for the test is going to be this first one here. If you need to pause and type these in, that's fine. You can just do it anytime you need to. All right, what is government? Oh, I've already talked about that, haven't I? Oh, that's the same question. As we look, and this is under that number 1, what is government? What is government? Well, government has 3 types of power. Legislative power, which is what makes the laws. In our country, the legislative branch is Congress, and our Congress has 2 houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. It also has the executive branch, which is what enforces the law. The president and the vice president make up the executive branch. Of course, there's a lot of institutions called bureaucracies that are part of the executive branch that enforce the laws. We also see the judicial branch, which is meant to interpret laws and settle disputes. So those are things you need to make sure you're aware of, that the government has 3 types of power: lawmaking power, enforcement power, and law interpreting power. Okay, those are the 3 types of power that government has. Again, pause if you need to. Now, number 2 in your notes, what major characteristics do all states share or make up a state? Okay, there are 4 things that every state has. Now, first of all, what is a state? A state is a political unit with the power to make and enforce laws over a group of people living within a clearly defined territory. So the United States is considered a state. The country of France is considered a state. Germany is a state. Zimbabwe is a state. They have clearly defined boundaries. They have political power to make and enforce laws among the people in that particular defined boundary. So what 4 things make up a state? What are their 4 characteristics? Number 1, population. In other words, they have to have people. There have to be people living there. Now, it doesn't have to be a lot of people. There's a small country, a small state, if you want to call it that, in the South Pacific, about halfway between Australia and Hawaii, called Tuvalu. It's made up of 9 tiny little islands. They don't have more than 10 square miles of land total for the whole country, and not even, I think it's 10,500 people population. And that's an independent country. It's an independent state. So it doesn't have to have a lot of people. It just has to have people. Territory, it has to have clearly defined and recognized borders. And those borders have to not only be recognized by their own people, but by other countries as well. And many, many wars have been fought throughout history over where borders should be. And so that's kind of important to know as well. But territory, they have to have a territory as well as population. Number 3, they have to have a government, a political organization to issue and enforce laws. What kind of state would they be if they did not have a government? And number 4, sovereignty, the supreme power to act within its territory. So the United States has a government, it has people, and it has the authority, the supreme power to act within the territory. So when our government passes a law, they have the authority to do that. That's sovereignty. And it affects every one of us when they do so. Now, you may ask, what about like what we would call a state, like Texas or Oklahoma? Well, yes, they are a state, but they're not a state in this sense of a state, because they are not sovereign in their own right. I mean, they have their own powers and things, but the United States government has sovereignty over them in many, many ways and many, many areas. So the 50 United States individually would not make up a state in this sense of the word. But when we talk about state in this sense of the word, we're really talking about a country, okay? It's just that it's technically called a state, but we would call it a country, okay? And this is still under number 2. Why do most states limit the sovereign power of their government? You know, in our country, we have a constitution that limits the power of our government. There are certain things they can do, and there are certain things they cannot do. And most states or countries do the same thing. Why do most states limit the sovereign power of their governments? Well, they want to ensure that government leaders are subject to the laws of the land and are prevented from seizing too much power. John Adams, you know, our second president, he was the first vice president we ever had. He was also a founding father. He made this statement when we had the Constitution and started our government. He said that we are a nation of laws, not men. In other words, everyone in our country is subject to the law, no matter how high up you go, theoretically. Now, it doesn't always seem to work that way, but that's a discussion for another day. Okay? So number 3 on your notes, what are the major functions of government? In other words, why do we have a government? And there in your textbook are 5 primary reasons why government, 5 primary functions of government. Now, some of these I think could be consolidated. Your textbook just takes them and kind of makes it more clearly defined and more minutely defined. But let's look at them. Number 1, national security, to protect the country from external threats. So, for instance, on December 7th, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was bombed by Japan, our country was attacked from the outside. Same thing on 9/11, 2001, when the terrorists attacked New York City and Washington, D.C. Those were external threats from our country. And so one of the major functions of our government is to protect us from threats from outside of our country. Number 2, to maintain order. And really, you could put national security and maintaining order together. Just your textbook broke it up into 2. Maintaining order, according to your textbook, would be doing so within the bounds of the country. So, for instance, if someone is trying to break into your house, one of the functions of government when you call 911 is to come and stop that and to protect you. Okay? So, maintaining order is protecting citizens from one another. Really, if you put national security and maintaining order together, that is really the oldest purpose of government. Government was originally formed to protect the country from external threats and to protect people from one another. In other words, to give people a measure of security. And we'll talk more about that at some future point. Number 3, resolve conflict through the legal and the political system. You know, we recently had an election on November the 3rd. And in that election, there were disagreements about how things should go down, what should happen, what policy should be put forth. So how do we resolve that conflict? We went to the polls and we voted. And the people spoke and they elected their new president. They elected a new vice president. They elected their senators, their representatives. And in some states, they elected governors and other things. So we solved conflict that way. We let the people vote it out. We also have the legal system. So, for instance, if someone runs into your car and does not want to pay for it, you can take them to court and resolve that conflict through the legal system. So that's another of the major functions of government. Number 4, provide services such as public transportation, education, roads, that kind of thing. These things are paid for by tax dollars, but they're things that every country needs and are most likely not going to be provided by the private sector. I mean, it wouldn't be profitable for someone to build a road in your city, for instance, unless they could charge a fee for that, charge like a toll. And that doesn't normally work. I mean, there are some roads like that, but not many. So things like that, like the mail service, the United States Postal Service, that kind of stuff, those are things that the government provides that are not likely to be provided by the private sector. And so that's one of the functions of government. And number 5, provide for the public good. Again, I think number 4 and 5 could have been put together, but they separated it out a little bit. Provide for the public good is a little bit less clearly defined, but it's more like things like protecting our food supply. For instance, there was until 1906, there were no laws concerning how safe food had to be. So Teddy Roosevelt was president, and he really pushed and got passed the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 that started putting restrictions on how food producers could produce that food and what kind of requirements they had to keep it safe and clean. They provide for voting rights. So this is more of an active thing as far as like protecting your rights and your safety in that sense. So these are the 5 major functions of government that you need to make sure that you know. Okay. Next question, number 4, what theories of rule have been put forth to explain government? And there are really a lot more than what we're going to look at here, but these are the main ones that have come to the forefront over the years. For most of history, the idea where government got its power and came into being was this idea of divine right, or the divine right of kings, or in China they called it the mandate of heaven. Basically, this is the idea that God put the ruler in power and gives the ruler authority. The king is the king because God said he's the king, and he gives them the power to do whatever he wants to do, and you cannot question that. They the king is above the law. I'll give you an example. Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom over in England. She is the queen of the country, and they have a constitutional monarchy, so she doesn't have absolute power or complete power. But for instance, she does not have to have a driver's license to drive because she's the queen. She's above that. She does not have to be subject to those kind of things. And she truly believes in the divine right of kings. She believes that she was put there by God and has a authority from him. So that was the idea that most people have held throughout history. But in more recent times, they began to have political philosophers began to come up with other ideas. One of those is the idea of natural law, that nature's laws provide for an orderly system and all people are subject to it. This is one that you don't see as often, but it is there, and it has been around for some time, and it was popular more in the Middle Ages during that time period. And thirdly, this is the one that our country subscribes to for the most part, and many countries since the American Revolution have come to believe in this as well. It's called the social contract theory, and this is the idea that Thomas Hobbes, an English philosopher, put forth in his book called Leviathan that was written in 1651. And in that, he says that people originally lived in a state of nature without government or laws. And this state of nature allowed people absolute freedom to do whatever. I mean, if there's no government to stop you or to control your behavior, you can do whatever you want to do, right? But of course, there's also no security there as well. So there's absolute freedom, but no security. And this is something you need to be aware of. The more freedom you have, the less security you have. But the more secure you are, the less freedom you have as well. So it's kind of this balance. And that's the balance our country's been trying to strike since 1776. But anyway, people lived in a state of nature, according to Thomas Hobbes, without government, without laws, but also without security. And so his idea was that people, in order to have some measure of security and safety, entered into a social contract with one another to create a government that would protect them, okay, that would basically protect their freedoms, protect their liberties, and things like that. And they were willing to give up a certain measure of freedom in order to have that security. But basically, the social contract, and this is, you make sure you need to know this, came up with, Thomas Hobbes was the primary one. Other philosophers talked about it as well, maybe in a little bit different terms. But basically, this idea that people lived in the state of nature, came together, agreed to limit certain freedoms for a certain amount of order and safety. All right. We're going to go ahead and stop there. So make sure you finish up these notes and do the work that's associated with Chapter 1, Section 1. You can access the textbook online through well, let me just show you. You'll go to your class link, and yours may look a little different than mine, but over here under textbooks, you'll click on that. It's Hope McDougall Online, and I don't know what all textbooks you will have through Hope McDougall. Just depends on what classes you're in. But you will find the one that says United States Government Principles in Practice, and you can go to the online textbook right there. And so you can select a chapter and section, whatever. That looks a little different than what I'm used to. Let me see. I guess that's how we do it. Let's see. It's a little different. Oh, here we go. Part 1, essentially. We're going to start with Chapter 1. Here we go. And we're going to go. Chapter 1. We're going to go. Let's see. Oh, let's just go to Section 1 and see what happens. Of course, nothing is coming up. That's weird. That never happens on mine when I pull it up. Book pages. Let me just X that out and let's just try it again. X that out. We'll come here, go to Hope McDougall, go to the United States Government, go to the online textbook. We're going to select a unit or chapter, Chapter 1, and we want to go to Section 1. We want to go. Oh, but we have to select the tab here, it looks like. Well, I'm just not seeing anything. In mine, I can go to the Teacher's One-Stop Planner. You can't do that. But I can browse by unit. That's not it either. Interactive Teachers Edition. Here's where I go to it, but you should be able to access it. I don't know why it's not coming up for me. Maybe it's because I'm not a student, but you should be able to access the book. Here's what it looks like. And you can just go through the pages if you need to. Anyway, if you have any questions, please let me know. I hope you have a good day.